Caleb Vaughn's $25 million empire was built on precision, yet tonight his simple room service order had vanished into thin air. The CEO of Vaughn Industries sat in his penthouse suite, jaw clenched, watching the clock tick past 9:30 p.m. He'd been waiting for over an hour. Then came the gentle knock that would change everything. Behind that door wasn't the hotel staff he expected, but a tiny 5-year-old girl clutching a paper bag and something that would crack open his carefully constructed world. He had no idea this child held the key to filling a void he didn't even know existed, or that her simple gesture would lead him to discover what he'd been missing all along. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at the Grandview Hotel, each droplet creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below. Caleb Vaughn loosened his Italian silk tie and rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the tension that had been building throughout the day. Board meetings, merger negotiations, and a particularly heated conference call with investors in Tokyo had left him drained. All he wanted was his usual order: grilled salmon with asparagus, delivered promptly at 8:30 as he requested when he checked in 3 hours ago. Now it was approaching 10 p.m., and his patience had evaporated like steam from his untouched coffee cup. Caleb had built Vaughn Industries from a small consulting firm into a multinational corporation worth hundreds of millions, and he hadn't achieved that success by tolerating incompetence. His business empire spanned 3 continents, employed over 15,000 people, and generated annual revenues exceeding $800 million. Time was money, and tonight, someone was wasting both. He strode to the mahogany desk where his phone lay charging, his footsteps muffled by the plush Persian carpet that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen as he pulled up the hotel's direct line. The phone barely rang once before a nervous voice answered. "Good evening, Mr. Vaughn. This is Marcus at the front desk. How may I assist you?" "My dinner was supposed to arrive 90 minutes ago," Caleb said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled irritation that made seasoned executives squirm. "I have calls to make and reports to review. Where's my food?" There was a pause, followed by the rapid clicking of computer keys. "I sincerely apologize, sir. Let me check with the kitchen immediately. There seems to have been a communication error with room service. I'll have your order expedited right away." "You have 15 minutes, Caleb said, ending the call without waiting for a response. He'd stayed at the Grandview dozens of times over the years, drawn by its reputation for impeccable service and discretion. Tonight was testing that reputation severely. Caleb walked back to the window, his reflection staring back at him against the backdrop of the sprawling metropolis. At 38, he cut an imposing figure, tall and lean with sharp features that photographs captured well for business magazine covers. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the long day, and his charcoal gray suit still looked crisp. Success had been good to him, at least financially. The penthouse apartment in Manhattan, the vacation home in the Hamptons, the collection of vintage cars, they were all symbols of how far he'd climbed from his middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Yet standing there alone, surrounded by luxury that most people could only dream of, Caleb felt the familiar hollow sensation that crept in during quiet moments. It was something he'd grown expert at pushing aside, burying under the constant demands of running a global enterprise. Work was his refuge, his identity, his everything. Personal relationships had always taken a back seat to quarterly reports and expansion strategies. The soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. Finally, Caleb glanced at his Rolex, noting it was exactly 14 minutes since his call. At least someone had taken his deadline seriously. He strode to the door, already formulating the stern words he'd deliver about punctuality and professional standards. When he opened the door, however, the lecture died in his throat. Instead of a uniformed room service attendant, a small figure stood in the hallway, barely reaching his waist. A little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, held a paper bag in both hands, her dark eyes wide with nervousness. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded pink dress that had seen better days but was clearly well cared for. "Are you Mr. Vaughn?" she asked in a voice so soft he had to lean down to hear her properly. Caleb blinked, momentarily speechless. In 38 years of life and 15 years of high-stakes business dealings, he'd encountered virtually every scenario imaginable. But a child delivering his dinner was decidedly not one of them. Yes. I'm Mr. Vaughn, he managed, crouching down to her eye level. Are you here about my room service? The little girl nodded solemnly and held out the bag. Mama said to bring this to you. She's sorry it's late. She had to finish cleaning all the rooms first. As Caleb accepted the bag, the aroma of grilled salmon and herbs wafted up, making his stomach remind him how long it had been since lunch. But his attention was captured more by the child's serious expression and the way she seemed to be studying his face intently. Your mama works here? He asked gently. Yes, sir. She cleans the rooms and sometimes helps in the kitchen when they're busy. The girl shifted her weight from one small foot to the other. She works really hard. There was something in the way she said it, a maturity beyond her years, that caught Caleb off guard. He was about to ask her name when she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is for you too, she said, holding it out with both hands as if it were something precious. Caleb set the food bag on the nearby console table and accepted the paper. It was clearly from a child's coloring book, the kind with thick lines and simple shapes. But someone had taken great care with it. The drawing showed a man in a suit, presumably meant to be him, with a big smile and arms outstretched. Above the figure, in careful crayon letters, were the words, "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn." Below, in what was obviously an adult's handwriting, it read, "For your kindness to our family, Rosa and Mina Delgado." Caleb stared at the drawing, a strange tightness forming in his chest. You made this for me? The little girl, who he now knew was named Mina, nodded enthusiastically. Mama helped me write the words, but I did all the coloring. She said you always tip really good when you stay here, and that helps us buy groceries and pay for my school supplies. The tightness in Caleb's chest intensified. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him anything, let alone a child who barely knew him. His interactions with kids were virtually non-existent. Most of his friends from college had married and started families years ago, but Caleb had been too focused on building his empire to consider settling down. Children were abstract concepts to him, little people he occasionally saw in restaurants or airports, but never really thought about. This is beautiful, Mina, he said, and meant it. Thank you. Her face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire hallway. Do you really like it? I wanted to make the suit the right color, but I only had blue and black crayons. It's perfect, Caleb assured her. Blue is actually my favorite color. It wasn't true. He didn't really have a favorite color, but seeing Mina's delighted expression made the small lie feel worthwhile. She clapped her hands together, a gesture so innocent and joyful that it sent an unexpected warmth through him. Mina, where are you? A woman's voice called from somewhere down the hallway, tinged with worry. I have to go, Mina said, backing away from the door. Mama gets scared when she can't see me. Bye, Mr. Vaughn. She scampered down the hall toward the service elevator, her small legs moving quickly. Caleb watched until she disappeared around the corner, then slowly closed the door. He looked down at the drawing in his hands, studying the careful way she'd colored inside the lines, the deliberate placement of each crayon stroke. Walking back into the suite, Caleb set his dinner on the dining table, but found himself unable to focus on eating. Instead, he kept looking at the drawing, propping it up against the crystal water glass so he could see it while he ate. The simple gesture had affected him in a way he couldn't quite understand. When was the last time someone had thanked him for anything beyond a successful business deal or profitable quarter? The salmon was perfectly prepared, but Caleb barely tasted it. His mind kept returning to Mina's serious expression when she talked about her mother working hard, and the way her face had transformed when she smiled. There was something about the child's presence that had shifted something inside him, like a light being switched on in a room he hadn't realized was dark. After finishing his meal, Caleb tried to return to his work. He had emails from 3 different time zones waiting for responses, and a presentation to review for tomorrow's meeting with potential investors. but the numbers and charts seemed to blur together on his laptop screen. His eyes kept drifting to the drawing, and his mind kept wandering to questions he'd never considered before. What was it like for a child to grow up with a mother who worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet? He thought about his own childhood, which had been comfortable, if not luxurious. His parents had both worked steady jobs, his father as an engineer and his mother as a school administrator. There had never been worry about groceries or school supplies. College had been expected, not a distant dream dependent on scholarships and part-time jobs. Caleb's success had been built on hard work and intelligence, but also on a foundation of stability that he'd taken for granted. For the first time, he found himself wondering about the stories behind the people who cleaned his hotel rooms, served his meals, and maintained the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to. Unable to concentrate, he closed his laptop and walked to the window again. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets below glistening under the streetlights. Somewhere in this city, Mina was probably getting ready for bed, maybe in a small apartment where her mother counted tips to see if they could afford new shoes or a warm winter coat. The thought troubled him more than he expected. Caleb had always prided himself on being a fair employer, offering competitive salaries and good benefits to his corporate staff. But he'd never really considered the wider ecosystem of service workers whose labor supported his comfortable existence. They were invisible to him, part of the background machinery that kept high-end hotels and restaurants running smoothly. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find out more about Rosa Delgado and her daughter. Not because he had to, but because something about that brief encounter had awakened a part of himself he'd forgotten existed. The part that remembered what it felt like to be moved by simple human kindness. Caleb woke the next morning with unusual anticipation. His typical routine involved checking international markets, scanning business news, and reviewing his schedule over room service coffee. But today, his first thought was about the little girl who delivered his dinner and the drawing that was still propped up on his nightstand. After showering and dressing in his usual armor of expensive suits, this time navy blue with a silver tie, Caleb made his way down to the hotel's main floor. The Grand View's lobby was a study in understated elegance, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and fresh orchids arranged in tall vases. He'd walked through this space hundreds of times without really seeing it, focused instead on his phone or the mental checklist of tasks awaiting his attention. This morning, however, he noticed details that had previously escaped him. The way the morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting geometric patterns on the polished floor. The soft conversations of other guests, mixing with the gentle classical music that played from hidden speakers. The staff members who moved efficiently through the space, ensuring everything appeared effortless for the paying customers. At the concierge desk, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples looked up with professional warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Vaughn. How may I assist you today? I'd like to speak with someone about one of your housekeeping staff members," Caleb said, keeping his voice casual. "Rosa Delgado. I believe she worked on my floor yesterday evening." The concierge's expression shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. In his experience, when wealthy guests specifically asked about staff members, it usually meant someone was either getting promoted or fired. "Of course, sir. May I ask if there was an issue with the service?" "Quite the opposite," Caleb assured him. "I'd like to commend her work, and I have some questions about employee recognition programs here at the hotel." Relief flickered across the concierge's face. "Certainly. Let me connect you with Mrs. Patterson, our housekeeping manager. She would be the best person to speak with about Mrs. Delgado." Within 10 minutes, Caleb found himself in a small, efficient office behind the main reception area. Patricia Patterson was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades managing large teams. Her desk was organized with military precision, and she clearly ran her department with similar attention to detail. "Mr. Vaughn, it's an honor to meet you," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. I understand you wanted to discuss Rosa Delgado?" "Yes. She's been cleaning my room during my stays here, and last night her daughter delivered my room service order. I was impressed by both their professionalism and courtesy." Mrs. Patterson smiled genuinely for the first time since he'd entered. Rosa is one of our most reliable employees. She's been with us for 3 years now, and I've never had a single complaint about her work. In fact, several guests have specifically requested her for their floors. Oh. Tell me about her situation, Caleb said, leaning forward slightly. I got the impression from her daughter that they might be facing some financial challenges. The housekeeping manager's expression grew more careful. Employee privacy was clearly important to her, but she seemed to sense that Caleb's interest was genuine rather than merely curious. I can share that Rosa is a single mother who works very hard to provide for her daughter. She actually works 2 jobs, here at the hotel and at a cleaning service for office buildings. Mina sometimes has to come to work with her when school is out or when her regular babysitter isn't available." End quote. Caleb thought about the serious expression on Mina's face when she talked about her mother working hard. What kind of career advancement opportunities exist for housekeeping staff? Limited, unfortunately, Mrs. Patterson admitted. Rosa has expressed interest in moving into hospitality management, but she lacks the formal education and experience that most hotels require for those positions. She's incredibly bright and has excellent people skills, but in this industry, credentials often matter more than ability. An idea began forming in Caleb's mind, still rough around the edges, but gaining clarity with each piece of information. Does the hotel have any scholarship or continuing education programs? We have some basic training programs, but nothing that would lead to the kind of significant career advancement Rosa would need to substantially improve her situation. Mrs. Patterson studied Caleb's face carefully. May I ask why you're interested in Rosa's career development? Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Yesterday was the first time in years that someone thanked me not for a business deal or professional achievement, but simply for treating them with basic human decency. It made me realize how little attention I've paid to the people whose work makes my lifestyle possible." End quote. The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise Mrs. Patterson. She'd probably expected a wealthy guest looking to solve his conscience with a small charitable gesture, not someone grappling with larger questions about privilege and responsibility. "Rosa is scheduled to work this afternoon," she said after a pause. "If you'd like to speak with her directly, I could arrange for that to happen during her break." "I'd appreciate that," Caleb said, standing to leave. "And Mrs. Patterson? I'd like this conversation to remain confidential for now." "Of course, Mr. Vaughn." Caleb spent the rest of the morning in meetings, but his mind kept drifting to the afternoon conversation ahead. He'd built his career on reading people, understanding their motivations and capabilities within minutes of meeting them. But this situation felt different. His interest in Rosa and Mina wasn't transactional. It was something deeper and more personal. At 2 p.m., he found himself back in Mrs. Patterson's office, this time joined by a woman who was clearly nervous about meeting one of the hotel's most important guests. Rosa Delgado was petite and probably in her early 30s, with warm brown eyes and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from facing life's challenges without losing hope. She wore the hotel's standard housekeeping uniform, but she carried herself with a professionalism that transcended her job title. "Mrs. Delgado, please sit down," Caleb said, trying to put her at ease. "I wanted to thank you personally for the excellent service you've provided during my stays here." Rosa's tension eased slightly, but she remained formal. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I appreciate your kind words. Your daughter delivered my dinner last night, along with a drawing she made for me. It was a thoughtful gesture that meant more to me than you might realize." At the mention of Mina, Rosa's entire demeanor softened. The love she felt for her daughter was immediately apparent, transforming her from a nervous employee into a proud mother. "Mina is very artistic," she said, her accent adding a musical quality to her words. "She loves to draw and color. I hope she wasn't any trouble." "None at all. In fact, she was delightful." Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Patterson tells me you're interested in advancing into hotel management. I'd like to hear about your goals." Rosa glanced at the housekeeping manager, clearly uncertain about how much to share. Mrs. Patterson nodded encouragingly. "I've always been interested in the hospitality industry." Rosa began slowly. "When I was young, in El Salvador, my grandmother owned a small inn. I used to help her take care of the guests, and I loved seeing how happy we could make people feel welcome. When I came to the United States, I hoped to eventually work my way up in a hotel, but without a college degree or formal training, most places won't consider me for management positions. What kind of timeline were you thinking for your education? Caleb asked. I've been saving money to take some business classes at the community college, but it's difficult with Mina's expenses and our rent. I estimate it would take me at least 4 years to complete a degree while working full-time, assuming I could find the money for tuition and books. 4 years. Caleb thought about how much his life had changed in the past 24 hours, just from a brief interaction with her daughter. 4 years seemed like an eternity for someone with Rosa's obvious potential to be stuck in a job that didn't utilize her abilities. Mrs. Delgado, I have a proposition for you, he said, leaning forward. My company, Vaughn Industries, has several subsidiary businesses, including a hospitality consulting firm that works with hotels and resorts around the world. We're always looking for people who understand the industry from the ground up, who can relate to both guests and staff. Rosa's eyes widened, but she remained cautious. I don't understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that you might be exactly the kind of person we need. Someone with real experience, genuine care for customer service, and the motivation to excel. The question is whether you'd be interested in a position that would allow you to use your skills while providing opportunities for growth and education. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Rosa looked at Mrs. Patterson, then back at Caleb, clearly trying to process what was being offered. I don't have any experience in consulting, she said finally, but you have years of experience in hospitality, just from a different perspective. You understand what makes guests comfortable, what problems arise in day-to-day operations, and how to manage those challenges efficiently. Those insights are incredibly valuable to hotels looking to improve their service. Caleb could see the wheels turning in Rosa's mind, hope warring with practical concerns. What would this position involve? Initially, you'd work with our consulting team as a hospitality specialist, helping to evaluate and improve hotel operations. The company would provide training in business principles, project management, and industry best practices. There would also be opportunities to pursue formal education, with tuition assistance as part of your benefits package. And Mina? Rosa asked, the question that mattered most to her. Our corporate headquarters has an excellent on-site childcare facility. Mina would be welcome there after school and during breaks. We also offer flexible scheduling for parents. Rosa's composure finally cracked, tears forming in her eyes. I don't know what to say. This seems too good to be true. It's not charity, Caleb said firmly. This is a business decision. I believe you have the skills and perspective that would make you valuable to our organization. But I also won't pretend that meeting your daughter didn't influence my thinking. She reminded me that behind every business transaction are real people with dreams and challenges. Mrs. Patterson had been watching the exchange with growing amazement. In 30 years of hotel management, she'd never witnessed anything like this conversation. If you're interested, Caleb continued, I'd like you to visit our offices next week for a formal interview. You'd meet with my head of human resources and the director of our hospitality consulting division. They'll be able to explain the position in more detail and answer any questions you have. Rosa nodded slowly, still processing the magnitude of what was being offered. Yes, I'm very interested. But I have to ask, why are you doing this? It was a fair question, and one Caleb had been asking himself since the previous evening. Because your daughter taught me something important yesterday. She showed me that kindness and gratitude still exist in the world, and that they matter more than I realized. I've spent so many years focused on profit margins and market share that I forgot about the human element of business. He stood up, extending his hand to Rosa. I hope you'll consider this opportunity seriously. I think you could surprise yourself with what you're capable of achieving. Rosa stood as well, taking his hand with both of hers. Mr. Vaughn, I don't know how to thank you. Just be prepared to work hard, he said with a smile. This will be easy, but I have a feeling you're not afraid of hard work. After Rosa left to return to her duties, Caleb remained in Mrs. Patterson's office for a few more minutes. The housekeeping manager was clearly still processing what she'd witnessed. "That was an extraordinary thing you just did," she said. "Was it?" Caleb asked. "Or was it just good business?" Rosa has qualities that can't be taught: integrity, dedication, genuine care for others. Those are exactly the characteristics we need in our consulting division. "Perhaps," Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing smile, "but I think there's more to it than that." She was right, of course. As Caleb made his way back to his suite, he reflected on the truth behind his actions. Meeting Mina had cracked open something inside him that had been sealed shut for years, the part of him that remembered why success mattered. Not just for personal achievement, but for the opportunities it created to make a difference in other people's lives. In his suite, Mina's drawing was still propped up against the water glass on his dining table. He picked it up, studying the careful crayon strokes and the innocently hopeful smile she'd drawn on his face. Tomorrow, he would return to New York and to the demands of running a global corporation, but he would take this drawing with him, a reminder of the moment when a 5-year-old girl had given him something more valuable than any business deal, a reason to use his success for something beyond himself. The following week passed in a blur of activity for Caleb. Back in his Manhattan office, surrounded by the familiar chaos of conference calls, strategy sessions, and financial reports, he found himself thinking frequently about Rosa and Mina. He'd spoken with his human resources director, Janet Miller, about creating a position that would utilize Rosa's unique background and perspective. Janet, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd been with the company for over a decade, had been intrigued by the concept. "We've been looking for ways to differentiate our hospitality consulting services," Janet had said during their Monday morning meeting. "Having someone on the team who's actually worked in operations, who understands the challenges from the ground up, could give us a significant competitive advantage." Caleb's head of hospitality consulting, David Chen, had been equally enthusiastic. A former hotel manager himself, David immediately grasped the value of Rosa's experience. "Most consultants come in with theories and spreadsheets," David explained. "But we rarely have someone who's actually cleaned the rooms, dealt with difficult guests, and worked the long hours that most hotel employees face. Rosa could provide insights that we'd never get from traditional market research." By Wednesday, they'd crafted a position that would ease Rosa into the consulting world while building on her existing strengths. She'd start as a hospitality operations specialist, working directly with David's team to evaluate hotel efficiency, staff satisfaction, and guest experience. The role included a salary that was more than double what she'd been earning at the hotel, comprehensive health benefits, and a tuition reimbursement program that would allow her to pursue her degree in business administration. On Thursday afternoon, Rosa arrived at the Vaughn Industries headquarters for her interview. The building was a gleaming 40-story tower in Midtown Manhattan, its lobby adorned with modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular city views. Rosa had dressed in her best outfit, a simple but elegant navy blue dress that she'd bought for job interviews years ago but rarely had occasion to wear. Caleb watched from his office window on the 38th floor as Rosa emerged from a taxi on the street below. Even from that distance, he could see her pause for a moment, looking up at the building with what he imagined was a mixture of awe and nervousness. He felt a flutter of anxiety himself, hoping that this opportunity would prove to be everything he'd envisioned. The interview process took most of the afternoon. Rosa met first with Janet Miller, who walked her through the company's benefits and policies. Then came a longer session with David Chen and 2 other members of the consulting team, where they discussed her experience and how it might translate to their client work. Finally, she had a brief meeting with Caleb himself, more of a formality than a real interview, since he'd already made his decision. "How did it go?" he asked, as Rosa settled into the chair across from his desk. "Everyone was very kind," she said, still seeming somewhat overwhelmed by the building's grandeur and the scope of what was being offered. "I have to admit, I'm nervous about whether I can live up to your expectations." "Rosa, let me tell you something I've learned in 15 years of business," Caleb said, leaning back in his chair. "Technical skills can be taught. Work ethic, integrity, and genuine care for others can't be. You already have the most important qualifications for this job. But what if I make mistakes? What if I don't understand the business side of things quickly enough? Caleb smiled, remembering his own early days in corporate America, when every meeting felt like a test he might fail. You'll make mistakes. We all do. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people isn't the absence of mistakes, it's how quickly you learn from them and move forward. Rosa nodded, taking a deep breath. When would you need me to start? That depends on how much notice you need to give at the hotel and how quickly you can arrange things for Mina. I don't want to rush you into something you're not ready for. The hotel will need 2 weeks' notice, Rosa said. And I'll need to find a new apartment, somewhere closer to your offices and Mina's new school. About that, Caleb said, pulling out a folder from his desk drawer. The company has relationships with several corporate housing providers in the area. We can arrange temporary housing while you look for a permanent place, if that would be helpful. Rosa stared at him, once again overwhelmed by the level of support being offered. Mr. Vaughn, I keep waiting for you to tell me what you want in return for all this. It was a fair question, one that spoke to Rosa's practical intelligence and perhaps some hard-learned lessons about offers that seemed too good to be true. Caleb considered his answer carefully. I want you to be successful, he said finally. I want you to prove that talent and determination matter more than pedigree and connections. And I want to build a consulting division that understands hospitality from every angle, including the perspectives that most core companies ignore. And Mina? I want Mina to grow up seeing that education and hard work can change everything. I want her to have opportunities that weren't available to you at her age. Caleb paused, thinking about the drawing that was now framed and sitting on his apartment's bookshelf. Your daughter reminded me that success isn't just about accumulating wealth or power. It's about creating possibilities, for yourself and for others. 3 weeks later, Rosa officially joined Vaughn Industries. Her first day was a whirlwind of orientation sessions, introductions to team members, and tours of the facilities. Mina, meanwhile, was delighted with the company's childcare center, which was more like a small school with dedicated teachers, art supplies, and even a small playground on the building's roof garden. Caleb made a point of stopping by the consulting division's offices that afternoon to see how Rosa was settling in. He found her at a conference table with David Chen and 2 other consultants, reviewing photographs and floor plans from a hotel in Chicago that was struggling with operational efficiency. The guest flow pattern is all wrong, Rosa was saying, pointing to the hotel's lobby layout. Look how the check-in desk is positioned. Guests have to walk past the bar and restaurant to reach the elevators, but there's no clear signage directing them. And see this area here? That's dead space that could be used for additional seating or a concierge station. David was taking notes rapidly, clearly impressed by Rosa's observations. I never would have noticed those details from the photos alone. We usually focus on the financial data and guest satisfaction scores. The scores don't tell you why guests are dissatisfied, Rosa replied. But if you spent 3 years watching how guests move through hotel spaces, you start to see the problems that create frustration. Caleb listened from the doorway for several more minutes as Rosa continued her analysis. Her insights were sharp and practical, grounded in real experience rather than theoretical knowledge. She was already proving to be exactly the asset he'd hoped she would be. That evening, as Caleb was preparing to leave the office, he received a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a photo of Mina sitting at a small desk in the childcare center, carefully coloring in what appeared to be another drawing. Below the photo was a message from Rosa. She wanted to make you another picture, to say thank you for her new school. We are both grateful beyond words. Caleb stared at the photo for a long time, noting the concentration on Mina's face and the neat organization of crayons around her workspace. In the background, he could see other children playing and learning, all of them benefiting from the kind of high-quality care that most working parents could only dream of providing. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced since his early days building the company, a sense of purpose that went beyond profit margins and market share. Rosa and Mina had given him a gift he hadn't known he needed, the reminder that his success could be a tool for creating positive change in other people's lives. 6 months later, Rosa had become one of the most valuable members of the hospitality consulting team. Her recommendations had helped 3 different hotel chains improve their operational efficiency and guest satisfaction scores, leading to contracts worth over $12 million for Vaughn Industries. More importantly, her success had inspired Caleb to expand the company's approach to talent acquisition, looking beyond traditional credentials to find people with unique perspectives and untapped potential. The company had also established the Vaughn Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused on providing educational opportunities and career development programs for service industry workers. Rosa had been instrumental in designing the foundation's programs, drawing on her own experiences to create pathways that would help others make similar transitions. On a sunny Saturday morning in spring, Caleb found himself in Central Park, not for his usual solitary morning run, but for the foundation's first annual family picnic. Dozens of employees and their children had gathered for games, food, and the kind of relaxed socializing that rarely happened in corporate settings. He spotted Mina immediately, now 6 years old, and even more confident than when he'd first met her. She was leading a group of younger children in some kind of art project, her natural leadership abilities already apparent. Rosa stood nearby, talking with David Chen and several other colleagues, clearly comfortable in her role as both professional and mother. "Mr. Vaughn!" Mina called out when she noticed him, running over with an enthusiasm that made several nearby parents smile. "Look what I made!" She held up a large poster board, covered with drawings and photographs. At the center was a picture of the Vaughn Industries building, surrounded by smaller drawings of people working, children playing, and families spending time together. "It's a story," Mina explained seriously, "about how you helped Mama get her dream job, and how that helped other people get dream jobs too, and how now lots of kids have a good place to go after school." Caleb knelt down to examine the poster more closely, marveling at the complexity of the story Mina had created. Her artistic skills had definitely improved over the past months, but more than that, her understanding of cause and effect, of how individual actions could ripple outward to affect entire communities, was remarkably sophisticated for someone her age. "This is incredible, Mina," he said. "You've captured something important here. Mama says that when people help each other, it makes everyone stronger," Mina replied. "Like in my class, when we work together on projects. Everyone has different ideas, but when we put them together, we make something really good." The wisdom in her words struck Caleb with unexpected force. Here was a 6-year-old articulating the philosophy that had guided the most meaningful year of his professional life. He thought about all the traditional business advice he'd received over the years. The emphasis on competition, individual achievement, and maximizing shareholder value. None of it had brought him the satisfaction he'd found in watching Rosa flourish, or in seeing the foundation's programs help dozens of other families. "You're absolutely right," he told Mina. "And you know what? You and your mama taught me that lesson." Rosa approached, having finished her conversation with the other consultants. She looked radiant in a way that went far beyond her professional success. There was a lightness to her bearing, a confidence that came from knowing she could provide security for her daughter while pursuing her own dreams. "I hope she's not bothering you with her artwork," Rosa said, though her tone suggested she was proud rather than apologetic. "Never," Caleb replied, standing up. "In fact, I was hoping to talk with both of you about something." He gestured toward a quieter area of the park where they could speak privately. As they walked, Caleb found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that evening at the Grandview Hotel. Rosa had not only exceeded every expectation in her consulting role, but had also become an informal mentor to other employees making career transitions. Her insights had influenced company policy, from flexible scheduling options to expanded educational benefits. "Rosa, I've been thinking about the next phase of your career development," Caleb began once they'd settled on a bench overlooking the park's reservoir. "David tells me you've been interested in taking on more strategic responsibilities." Rosa nodded, her expression becoming more serious. "I love the consulting work, but I've been wondering about the business development side of things. Understanding how we acquire new clients, how we structure our service offerings. What if I told you there was an opportunity to lead that effort for a new division we're considering?" Rosa's eyebrows rose with interest. "What kind of division?" Workforce development consulting, helping companies identify and develop talent from non-traditional backgrounds. The way we did with you. There's a growing recognition in the business world that diverse perspectives and experiences lead to better outcomes, but most organizations don't know how to tap into that potential. Kai. The idea had been percolating in Caleb's mind for months, sparked by the success of Rosa's integration into the company and the positive response from clients who'd worked with her. Several CEOs had specifically asked about Vaughn Industries' approach to talent development, intrigued by the fresh insights Rosa brought to their projects. "You want me to help other companies find their own Rosas?" she asked, understanding immediately. Exactly. You'd work with organizations to identify overlooked talent within their existing workforce, develop training programs that build on people's existing strengths, and create career pathways that don't require traditional credentials. Rosa was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing the magnitude of what was being proposed. Mina had wandered over to watch some ducks on the water, giving the adults space to talk. "It would mean traveling, meeting with executives at different companies," Rosa said finally. "Some travel, yes, but we'd structure it around your schedule with Mina. And as the division grows, you'd have a team working with you. You wouldn't be doing it alone. What makes you think I'm ready for something like this?" Caleb smiled, remembering asking himself similar questions when he'd first started his company. "Rosa, you've already proven you can analyze complex business problems and provide practical solutions. You've demonstrated leadership with your colleagues and clients. Most importantly, you understand both sides of the equation, what it's like to be overlooked, and what it takes to succeed when given the opportunity." End quote. Rosa looked out over the water, where Mina was now pointing excitedly at a family of geese. "A year ago, I was cleaning hotel rooms and worrying about how to pay for Mina's school supplies. Now you're talking about me running a division of a major corporation. A year ago, you had the same intelligence, work ethic, and insight you have now," Caleb replied. "The only thing that's changed is the platform you're working from. And if I fail, then you'll have learned something valuable that will help you succeed the next time. But I don't think you're going to fail, Rosa. I think you're going to surprise yourself with what you can accomplish." Rosa turned to look at him directly, her expression serious, but no longer doubtful. "What would this mean for Mina? For our stability?" "It would mean a significant salary increase, equity in the new division, and the kind of career trajectory that could set both of you up for long-term financial security. But more than that, it would mean Mina grows up watching her mother build something meaningful, something that helps other families the way we helped yours." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mina came running back from the water's edge, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama, there's a whole family of baby ducks. Can we come back and see them again?" "Of course, Mija," Rosa said, pulling her daughter close. "We can come back whenever you want." Caleb watched the interaction between mother and daughter, noting the easy affection and the way Rosa's entire demeanor softened when she focused on Mina. This was why the opportunity mattered so much, not just for Rosa's professional development, but for the example it would set for her daughter about what was possible in life. "I'd like to accept your offer," Rosa said, looking back at Caleb. "But I have one condition." "Name it." "I want to make sure that any program we develop includes support for working parents, childcare, flexible scheduling, understanding that people's family responsibilities don't make them less committed to their careers." "Done. Gone," Caleb said immediately. "In fact, I think that should be a cornerstone of what we offer. Most workforce development programs ignore the practical barriers that keep talented people stuck in dead-ended jobs." They shook hands on the agreement, a gesture that felt simultaneously formal and deeply personal. As they walked back toward the main picnic area, Caleb reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had started with a delayed room service order, a small gesture from a child, and his own unexpected recognition that success meant more than accumulating wealth and power. The picnic continued around them, with employees and their families enjoying the rare opportunity to connect outside the corporate environment. Caleb found himself genuinely relaxed for the first time in months, engaging in conversations that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or market analysis. He helped organize a three-legged race for the children, judged an impromptu talent show, and even found himself getting drawn into a spirited discussion about local school funding with several of the parents. As the afternoon wound down and families began packing up their belongings, Mina approached Caleb one more time. She was holding a small wrapped package, clearly something she'd prepared in advance. "This is for you," she said, presenting the gift with the same formal courtesy she'd shown during their first meeting at the hotel. Caleb unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small frame drawing. This one was more sophisticated than her earlier work, showing a man in a business suit standing next to a woman and a little girl, all of them smiling. In the background was a building with many windows, representing his company, and around the edges were smaller figures of people working, learning, and playing. At the bottom, in Mina's careful printing, were the words, "Mr. Vaughn's Family Company." Below that, in Rosa's handwriting, was a note. "Thank you for showing us that business can be about more than business." Caleb felt his throat tighten as he studied the drawing. The word, family, stood out, representing something he'd never associated with his corporate life before. The looking around at the diverse group of employees and their children, people from different backgrounds and circumstances who'd found opportunities to grow and succeed. He realized that Mina had captured something essential about what Vaughn Industries had become. "This is beautiful, Mina," he said, crouching down to her level. "But you know what I like most about it?" "What?" "You drew yourself and your mama as part of the picture, because you are part of this family now." Mina beamed with pride, throwing her arms around his neck in an impulsive hug that caught him completely off guard. For a moment, Caleb froze, unaccustomed to such spontaneous physical affection. Then, he found himself hugging her back, marveling at how such a simple gesture could convey so much trust and affection. When Mina released him and skipped back to her mother, Caleb remained crouched for a few seconds longer, processing the emotions that the brief embrace had triggered. He thought about his own childhood, his relationship with his parents, and the choices he'd made that had prioritized professional achievement over personal connections. Standing up, he looked around at the families gathered in the park, at the children playing and the parents laughing together, and he realized that somewhere along the way, he'd become part of something larger than himself. Not just a CEO or a business owner, but a member of a community that extended far beyond the walls of his office building. As he drove home that evening, the framed drawing sitting on his passenger seat, Caleb thought about the path that had led him to this point. The delay in room service that had initially frustrated him now seemed like the most fortunate inconvenience of his life. Without it, he never would have met Mina, never would have learned about Rosa's situation, and never would have discovered the satisfaction that came from using his success to create opportunities for others. His apartment, a sprawling penthouse that had once felt like the ultimate symbol of his achievements, now seemed almost hollow by comparison to the warmth and connection he'd experienced at the company picnic. The expensive furniture and artwork were beautiful, but they couldn't compare to the joy on Rosa's face when she talked about her new career prospects, or the pride in Mina's voice when she explained her latest drawing. Caleb placed Mina's new artwork on his kitchen counter, next to the original drawing that had started everything. Looking at them side by side, he could see not just the improvement in her artistic abilities, but the evolution of her understanding about the world and her place in it. In the first drawing, she depicted him as a solitary figure, someone to be thanked for his generosity. In the second, he was part of a larger community, connected to others through relationships that went beyond simple transactions. The difference between those two drawings, Caleb realized, represented the difference between the person he'd been a year ago and the person he was becoming. The old Caleb had measured success in terms of personal achievement, market dominance, and financial accumulation. The new Caleb was beginning to understand that true success might be measured by the opportunities you create for others, the relationships you build, and the positive impact you have on your community. Over the following months, Rosa's new division exceeded every expectation. Working with companies across various industries, she developed innovative approaches to talent identification and development that consistently delivered results. Her programs helped organizations discover hidden potential within their existing workforce, while creating pathways for advancement that didn't rely solely on formal education or traditional credentials. The division's first major success came with a national restaurant chain that was struggling with high turnover and low employee engagement. Rosa's team spent weeks observing operations, talking with workers at every level, and analyzing the disconnect between corporate policies and ground-level realities. Their recommendations included restructured advancement criteria, enhanced training programs, and leadership development opportunities for hourly employees who showed potential. The results were dramatic. Employee retention improved by 35%, customer satisfaction scores increased significantly, and the company saved millions in recruitment and training costs. More importantly, dozens of workers who had been stuck in entry-level positions found themselves on career paths they'd never imagined possible. Word of the division's success spread quickly through business networks, leading to contracts with hospitality companies, retail chains, and even manufacturing firms. Each project reinforced Rosa's core insight that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity is often limited by preconceptions about credentials and backgrounds. Caleb watched Rosa's professional evolution with the pride of a mentor, but also with growing respect for her unique abilities. She had developed into a formidable business leader, comfortable presenting to C-suite executives while never losing her connection to the frontline workers whose lives were affected by corporate decisions. Mina, now 7 years old and thriving in her new school, had become something of a celebrity among Vaughn Industries employees. Her artwork adorned several offices, and her occasional visits to the childcare center brought joy to both children and staff. She was growing up with a confidence and sense of possibility that reflected her mother's transformation, but also with the groundedness that came from understanding that opportunities were precious and should never be taken for granted. On the first anniversary of Rosa's hiring, Caleb organized a small celebration in the company's executive conference room. The guest list included Rosa's consulting team, several clients who had worked with the Workforce Development Division, and a few other employees who had been inspired by Rosa's story to pursue their own career transitions. As Rosa stood to address the group, Caleb was struck by her transformation. The nervous woman who had sat in Mrs. Patterson's office just 1 year earlier had evolved into a confident executive who commanded respect through her expertise and authenticity. She wore a tailored business suit that conveyed professionalism without sacrificing her personal style, and she spoke with the authority that came from proven success. "A year ago, I was cleaning hotel rooms and wondering how I was going to pay for my daughter's school supplies," Rosa began, her voice steady and clear. "Today, I'm running a division that has helped hundreds of people discover their own potential for growth and achievement." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of colleagues who had become friends and collaborators. "But the most important thing I've learned this year isn't about business strategy or market analysis. It's about the responsibility that comes with opportunity. When someone believes in your potential and gives you a chance to prove yourself, you have an obligation not just to succeed, but to extend that same faith to others." Caleb felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he listened to Rosa speak. This was exactly what he'd hoped for when he'd first offered her the position, not just individual success, but a ripple effect of positive change that would benefit countless others. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled over refreshments, Caleb found himself in conversation with Dr. Sarah Williams, a business school professor who served on the Vaughn Foundation's advisory board. "You realize what you've accomplished here goes far beyond a single hiring decision," Dr. Williams said, gesturing toward Rosa, who was deep in conversation with a client about expanding their workforce development program. "How do you mean?" "You've demonstrated something that business schools have been struggling to teach for years, that sustainable competitive advantage comes from recognizing and developing human potential, not just from financial engineering or market manipulation." Caleb considered her words. "I have to admit, when I first offered Rosa the job, I was acting more on instinct than on any business theory." "The best leaders often do," Dr. Williams replied. "But the fact that you've systematized that instinct, turned it into a replicable business model, that's what makes this significant. You're not just helping individual employees advance their careers, you're changing how companies think about talent development." End quote. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Caleb lingered in the conference room, looking out at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view from the 38th floor was spectacular, encompassing Central Park to the north and the bustling streets of Midtown Manhattan spreading out in all directions. A year ago, this view had represented conquest to him, a symbol of how high he'd climbed above his modest beginnings. Tonight, it looked different. The lights below represented not just buildings and businesses, but communities of people working, learning, and striving for better lives. His company was part of that ecosystem, not separate from it, and his success was meaningful only insofar as it contributed to the greater good. Rosa appeared beside him, having finished saying goodbye to the last of the guests. "Thank you for tonight," she said simply. "And for everything this year has brought." "Thank you for proving that my instincts were right," Caleb replied. "Though, I have to admit, you've exceeded even my most optimistic expectations." "I had good teachers," Rosa said with a smile. "And good examples to follow." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Finally, Rosa spoke again. "Mina wants to give you something before we leave. She's been working on it for weeks." Rosa stepped into the hallway and returned with Mina, who had been waiting patiently in the reception area with one of the administrative assistants. The little girl carried a large portfolio, the kind used by art students, and her expression was serious with concentration. "This is for you, Mr. Vaughn," she said, opening the portfolio to reveal a series of drawings that told the story of the past year. The first drawing showed their initial meeting at the hotel, with Mina as a small figure holding a bag of food and Caleb as a tall man in a suit. The subsequent drawings chronicled Rosa's first day at the office, Mina's excitement about the childcare center, family moments in their new apartment, and various scenes from company events and celebrations. But it was the final drawing that took Caleb's breath away. It showed a tree with deep roots and spreading branches. In the roots were figures representing Rosa and Mina, but also other families, other children, other workers who had benefited from the company's programs. In the branches were more figures, representing the possibilities and opportunities that grew from the foundation of support and recognition. At the base of the tree, in careful lettering, Mina had written, "The helping tree," and below that, "Everyone grows when someone believes in them." Caleb knelt down to Mina's level, studying each drawing with the attention it deserved. The artistic skill was remarkable for a 7-year-old, but more impressive was the sophisticated understanding of cause and effect, of how individual actions could create expanding circles of positive change. "Mina, this is incredible," he said. "You've captured something really important here. Mama says that helping people is like planting seeds," Mina explained. "You can't always see what's going to grow, but if you plant good seeds and take care of them, something beautiful will happen." Once again, Caleb found himself amazed by the wisdom that seemed to come so naturally to this child. Her metaphor of planting seeds was more eloquent than most business theories he'd studied, and more accurate than the complex models that consultants use to explain organizational change. "You're absolutely right," he told her. "And you know what? You and your mama were the first seeds that helped me understand that." Mina smiled, the kind of radiant expression that seemed to light up the entire room. "Does that mean we helped you grow too?" The question was so direct, so innocent in its honesty, that Caleb had to pause before answering. Had they helped him grow? The old Caleb would have bristled at the suggestion that he needed help from anyone, let alone from a single mother and her young daughter. But the person he'd become over the past year recognized the truth in Mina's words. "Yes," he said simply. "You helped me grow in ways I didn't even know were possible." Mina nodded sagely, as if this confirmation was exactly what she'd expected. "Good. Mama says that when people help each other grow, everybody gets stronger." As Rosa and Mina prepared to leave, heading home to the comfortable apartment they now shared in a neighborhood with good schools and safe playgrounds, Caleb reflected on the profound changes that had reshaped not just their lives, but his own understanding of what success meant. The financial metrics were impressive. The Workforce Development Division had generated over $30 million in revenue. The foundation had helped more than 200 families improve their circumstances. And Vaughn Industries' reputation for innovative talent development had attracted top-tier clients and employees. But the personal metrics were even more meaningful. Rosa had evolved from a struggling single mother into a confident executive who was changing how companies thought about human potential. Mina was thriving academically and socially, growing up with opportunities and confidence that would have been unimaginable in their previous circumstances. And Caleb himself had discovered that the greatest satisfaction came not from accumulating wealth or power, but from using those resources to create possibilities for others. The hollow feeling that had once crept in during quiet moments had been replaced by a sense of purpose that extended far beyond quarterly earnings reports. Standing alone in the conference room as the cleaning crew began their evening routine, Caleb thought about the chain of events that had started with a delayed dinner and a child's simple gesture of gratitude. It seemed impossible that such small moments could have such far-reaching consequences, but perhaps that was the real lesson. That transformative change often began with individual acts of recognition, kindness, and courage. The future stretched ahead, full of new challenges and opportunities. Rosa's division was expanding internationally, with plans to work with companies in Europe and Asia. The foundation was developing partnerships with community colleges and vocational schools. And Mina continued to create artwork that captured truths about human nature and community that many adults spent years trying to understand. But as Caleb finally gathered his things and prepared to head home, he realized that the most important transformation had already occurred. He had learned to see beyond the narrow confines of traditional business success, to recognize the interconnected web of relationships and responsibilities that made achievement meaningful. Tomorrow would bring new meetings, new projects, and new opportunities to plant seeds that might grow into something beautiful. And somewhere in the city, a little girl who had once worried about school supplies was dreaming dreams as vast and limitless as the night sky outside his office windows. The story that had begun with room service and a hand-drawn thank you card had evolved into something much larger. A testament to the power of recognition, the importance of opportunity, and the profound truth that success shared is success multiplied. And in the years to come, as Rosa's programs helped thousands of workers discover their potential, as Mina grew into a young woman who understood her own power to create positive change, and as other companies adopted similar approaches to talent development, the ripple effects of that first moment of connection would continue to spread, touching lives in ways that none of them could fully imagine. The Millionaire CEO had ordered room service and received something far more valuable than a meal. He had received a reminder of his own capacity for compassion and the opportunity to transform that capacity into lasting change for countless others. In the end, it was not what he had given to Rosa and Mina that mattered most, but what they had given to him. The understanding that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate for ourselves, but in what we make possible for others.